The evening shimmered with golden light. The mansion glowed under chandeliers that hung like delicate glass clouds, scattering reflections across polished floors. The sound of soft laughter mixed with music drifting from hidden speakers. Guests in elegant clothes moved about the grand hall, sipping champagne and exchanging compliments that sounded polite but hollow. It was the kind of night where everyone wanted to be seen, not just for who they were, but for what they owned. The men wore suits tailored to perfection. The women glittered with jewelry that caught every flicker of light. Everything was perfect, at least on the surface. Among the moving crowd were the waitstaff, quiet and careful, trying not to disturb the illusion of perfection. They glided from table to table, trays balanced, faces polite but unreadable. They were invisible, as service workers often are at such events, present but unseen. One of them was a young woman in a simple uniform, her hair tied neatly back, her posture straight. She moved gracefully through the hall, offering drinks with a calm smile. Though she said little, her eyes carried something warm, something thoughtful. She didn't rush or stumble, even as guests brushed past her without a glance. She had worked here many times before, serving the wealthy without ever truly being noticed. Tonight felt no different, at least at first. At the far end of the room stood a group of guests gathered near the grand piano. It was an impressive instrument, sleek black, polished to a mirror shine, sitting quietly beneath a spotlight. Most people ignored it, too focused on conversation and networking to think about music. But one guest, a man known for his arrogance, noticed it. He was already loud from too much champagne, bragging about business, money, and cars. The people around him laughed at his jokes, not because they were funny, but because it was easier than disagreeing with him. When the waitress passed nearby, he caught sight of her. He smirked, whispering something to the woman beside him, who tried not to react. Then, as if seeking more attention, he spoke louder. "Hey, you there," he said, pointing with his glass. "Do you even know what that is?" He gestured toward the piano. The waitress stopped, surprised. She didn't quite understand if he was talking to her, but his eyes made it clear. A few nearby guests turned to look. "Yes, sir," she replied softly, still holding her tray. He grinned. "Oh, really? And what would someone like you know about that? Looks expensive, doesn't it?" There was laughter. Soft, uncomfortable, but still laughter. She didn't respond, only nodded politely, hoping he'd let it go. She'd dealt with guests like him before. People who saw service workers as part of the furniture, not human beings. She had learned that silence was sometimes the only way to survive the moment. But the man wasn't done. He leaned against the piano, enjoying the attention. "Come on then," he said mockingly. "Why don't you play us something? Let's see if you can make it sound half as good as it looks." More guests turned toward them. The room had grown quieter, curiosity rising. Some people smiled awkwardly, unsure if this was a joke or an insult. The waitress froze, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the tray. "I can't, sir," she said quietly. "I'm working." "Oh, nonsense." He laughed, waving a hand. "Just one song. I'm sure you can manage. Don't tell me you're scared." His words stung more than she wanted to admit. Not because he was right, but because she hated being humiliated in front of strangers. She could feel eyes on her, some amused, some sympathetic. The host, a gentleman who had been standing nearby, stepped forward, trying to ease the tension. "Let's not embarrass anyone," he said lightly. "She's doing her job," but the arrogant guest wouldn't stop. "Come on, it's just for fun. Let's hear if our lovely waitress can play." He clapped his hands as if that would convince her. A few people chuckled nervously, but others frowned. They knew this wasn't entertainment, it was cruelty wrapped in humor. The waitress looked at the piano, then back at the crowd. Her heart beat fast. Part of her wanted to walk away, to keep her dignity. Another part, a quieter, stronger part, wanted to show him that there was more to her than he could ever imagine. For a long moment she stood still. Then, gently, she placed her tray on a nearby table. "All right," she said softly. The room fell silent. Even the arrogant man seemed taken aback. He smiled, but it looked uneasy now. She walked toward the piano. The click of her shoes on the marble floor was the only sound. The lights from the chandelier danced across the polished surface of the instrument as she pulled out the bench and sat down. Her hands hovered above the keys, hesitant at first. Her reflection looked back at her from the black surface, calm, but with a flicker of something deeper in her eyes. The crowd waited. The arrogant guest crossed his arms, a smirk tugging at his lips, ready to laugh at her mistake, but she didn't play yet. She took a breath as if gathering her thoughts. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of memory. It had been a long time since she'd touched a piano, yet the feeling was still familiar, like meeting an old friend after years apart. Around her, the guests whispered. The room felt heavy with expectation. Even the air seemed to hold its breath, and then she began. The first notes were soft, gentle, almost fragile, like raindrops falling on quiet water. The melody floated through the room and the whispers faded into silence. No one expected it. The sound was pure, filled with emotion that words couldn't describe. It wasn't the polished perfection of a trained concert pianist. It was something more honest and something real. Each note carried warmth, sadness, and beauty all at once. The waitress no longer looked like a waitress. Her eyes were closed. Her body moved with the rhythm as if the music lived inside her. Guests who moments ago were laughing now stood still, captivated. The arrogant guest blinked, his smirk fading as he watched her fingers dance effortlessly over the keys. He didn't understand how this could be possible. The woman he had mocked, the one serving him drinks, was now commanding the entire room without saying a single word. The music filled every corner of the hall. The chandeliers, the marble, the glass, all seemed to shimmer differently. The melody told a story, one that everyone could feel but no one could explain. It spoke of pain, loss, love, and quiet strength. Some guests found themselves holding their breath, afraid to interrupt. Others felt an ache in their chest, memories they thought forgotten returning with each note. The arrogant man shifted uncomfortably. He could feel eyes turning toward him now, not with admiration but with judgment. He wanted to disappear, to take back his cruel words, but it was too late. The music had already revealed who he was, and who she truly was. When the last note lingered in the air, the room remained silent. No one moved. Even the hum of conversation that usually filled such gatherings was gone. The waitress opened her eyes slowly, almost surprised by the stillness. She looked around, unsure what to do. Then one person began to clap. Another followed. Soon the hall erupted in applause, loud, heartfelt, and real. She stood bowing, slightly embarrassed but smiling. The host looked at her in astonishment. For a moment she was no longer invisible. As she stepped back, her tray still resting quietly on the table, she noticed the arrogant guest watching her. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The waitress returned to her work as if nothing had happened, moving gracefully once more among the guests. But now the way people looked at her had changed. There was respect in their eyes, and something close to awe. The piano sat silently behind her, gleaming under the light, as if it, too, knew that something extraordinary had just taken place. And though the party continued, the mood had shifted. The laughter was softer, the conversations gentler. Something in that room, in every person present, had been touched by what they had just witnessed. No one would forget the sound of that music, and no one would look at that waitress the same way again. The sound of applause still echoed faintly in the grand hall long after she sat back down. The guests returned to their drinks and quiet conversations, but the air felt different now, softer, lighter, as if the music had left something beautiful behind. The waitress continued her work quietly, moving through the crowd again with her tray. People greeted her with smiles now, some whispering small compliments as she passed. She didn't quite know how to respond. Compliments weren't something she was used to. Usually she served, nodded politely, and vanished into the background. But tonight people saw her, really saw her. A few guests even asked if she was a professional pianist. She only smiled and said, "No, sir. I just used to play a long time ago." The truth was, music had once been her entire life. But life had changed, and so had she. There was no time for piano when bills had to be paid and work came first. Yet sitting there moments ago with her hands on those keys, she had felt something awaken inside her, something she thought she had lost forever. The arrogant guest, the one who had mocked her, stood at the far side of the room. His drink was still in his hand, but he hadn't touched it in a while. His laughter had faded completely. For the first time that evening, he looked unsure of himself. His confident posture was gone, replaced by awkward silence. People who had been near him before were now keeping their distance, pretending to be busy in other conversations. He could feel the shift. He could feel that the room no longer saw him as amusing but as cruel. He tried to shrug it off, forcing a small laugh. "Well, she surprised us all, didn't she?" he said to no one in particular, but no one laughed back. Across the hall, the host approached the waitress with a kind smile. He spoke softly so others wouldn't hear. "That was incredible," he said. "You truly have a gift. Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated. "My mother taught me," she said. "She used to play every evening when I was little. I would sit beside her and watch. After she passed, I stopped playing for a long time." The host nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You shouldn't have stopped. The way you play, it comes from the heart. That's something you can't learn from anyone." His words touched her, but she didn't know what to say. Compliments made her uncomfortable, maybe because she wasn't used to receiving them. Before she could respond, another guest approached, an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair. She placed her hand gently on the waitress's arm. "My dear, that was one of the most beautiful things I've heard in years," she said warmly. "You have a gift you shouldn't hide." The waitress smiled shyly. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot." The woman nodded and returned to her group, but her words lingered. For the next hour, the night carried on. The laughter returned, but it was gentler now. The arrogant man mostly stayed silent, glancing occasionally toward the waitress as if trying to find the right moment to speak. But every time he took a step forward, he stopped himself, unsure what to say. The waitress stayed busy, though her thoughts kept drifting back to the piano. Each time she passed by it, her fingers itched to touch the keys again. It was strange. She hadn't realized how much she missed that feeling until now. When the crowd finally began to thin out and the music from the speakers softened, the arrogant guest found his courage. He walked toward her, still holding his glass. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the confidence he had earlier. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "About earlier. I was just joking. Didn't mean to embarrass you." She paused, unsure whether to believe him. "It's all right, sir," she said softly. "You don't need to explain." But he shook his head. "No, I do. I was wrong. I thought, well, I just didn't expect that." He glanced at the piano. "You were amazing," she gave a small smile. "Thank you." He looked down, his pride fighting with guilt. "You must think I'm terrible." "I don't think that," she said simply. "Everyone makes mistakes." He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time that night, he saw her as a person, not just a waitress. Her calmness unsettled him. It wasn't anger or bitterness. It was grace, quiet and unshakable. He nodded, unable to say more. The host returned, carrying a glass of water. "You should sit for a moment," he said kindly to her. "You've been on your feet all night." She hesitated, but he insisted, pulling out a chair near the piano. She sat, feeling the weight lift from her legs. The piano gleamed under the soft lights, the same instrument that had changed everything only hours ago. "You really brought life into this room tonight," the host said. "Everyone's been talking about you. You may not realize it, but your music reminded people of something real, something they've been missing." She looked down, humbled. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." "It wasn't a scene," he said. "It was a gift." His words warmed her heart. She hadn't done it for attention. She just wanted to stop the laughter, the mockery, but somehow she had ended up moving an entire room. Meanwhile, the arrogant guest lingered nearby, too ashamed to join any conversation. He could hear bits of praise floating around the room, all directed toward her. He had wanted to be the star of the evening, yet somehow the quiet waitress he mocked had become the center of attention, not through pride, but through pure talent. He left quietly before the night ended. No one noticed his exit. When the last guest began to leave, the waitress helped clean up, stacking glasses and collecting plates. The host stopped her before she could head out. "If you ever want to play here again," he said gently, "I'd be honored to have you." She blinked, surprised. "Play as a pianist?" He smiled. "Yes, not as a waitress." "I mean it." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I don't think I'm ready for that." "Maybe not tonight," he said. "But someday. Don't forget, talent like yours doesn't disappear. It's just waiting to be seen." She thanked him, genuinely touched. When she stepped outside later, the cool night air brushed against her skin. The mansion lights glowed behind her and she could still hear faint laughter inside. She paused for a moment, looking back at the building. She didn't hate that place, even after what had happened. If anything, it had given her something back. Something she hadn't felt in years. The joy of playing. As she walked down the quiet street, she thought of her mother, of those evenings when they'd sit by the piano together, her mother's hands guiding hers gently across the keys. She could almost hear her mother's voice saying, "Never stop playing. Music keeps the soul alive." Tears stung her eyes, but they were soft, not painful. That night, when she reached her small apartment, she sat for a long time in silence. Her old keyboard sat in the corner, covered in dust. She hadn't touched it in years. Slowly, she walked over, plugged it in, and ran her fingers across the keys. The sound was weaker, not as rich as the grand piano from the mansion, but it was enough. She played a slow tune, her heart guiding every note. The room filled with warmth again, and for the first time in a long while, she felt peace. She didn't know what the future held, whether she'd ever play in front of people again, or if anyone would remember her performance that night. But something inside her had changed. She had remembered who she was, and somewhere across town, the arrogant guest sat alone in his car thinking about her, about the way she played, the way she looked so calm even after his cruel words. He had spent years chasing admiration, but in one evening, she had earned it without even trying. He realized that maybe for the first time in his life, he had met someone truly extraordinary. The morning light crept gently through the small cracks of her window, painting soft lines across the worn-out floor. She sat on the edge of her bed, still thinking about the night before. The sound of applause echoed faintly in her mind, mixed with the melody she had played on the grand piano. It felt almost unreal, like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. Her old keyboard sat quietly in the corner of the room, still plugged in from the night before. She looked at it with a small smile, then walked over and pressed a few keys. The sound was simple and thin, but it still made her heart stir. For years, she had buried that part of herself under long work hours and the need to survive. But now, something inside her had been reignited. As she played softly, she remembered her mother's words, the ones she used to hear when she was little. "Play when you're happy, play when you're sad. The piano doesn't care how you feel, it only listens." That memory made her eyes water, but in a peaceful way. Later that day, she got ready for work again. The uniform felt the same, the tasks were the same, but she didn't feel the same anymore. There was lightness in her step, like something inside her had finally opened up. When she reached the mansion again, a few of her coworkers looked at her differently. Some smiled knowingly, others whispered small things to each other, but not in a bad way. They had all seen what happened the night before. They had watched her turn a cruel moment into something unforgettable. One of the other servers, an older woman who'd been there for years, leaned in and said quietly, "You were wonderful last night. Everyone's still talking about it." She smiled modestly. "I didn't mean to make a show." The older woman chuckled. "Sometimes we don't plan moments like that. They just happen when they're meant to." Inside the hall, the atmosphere was calmer than usual. The host greeted her with a warm smile and told her that several guests had called to compliment her performance. He even mentioned that someone had asked if she'd be available to play again, not to serve, but to perform at another private event. Her heart skipped a beat when she heard that. "Me perform?" she said quietly. "Yes," the host said kindly. "They said your music made the night feel special. I told them I'd ask you first." She didn't know what to say. The idea of performing scared her a little, but it also filled her with excitement. It had been years since she'd done something purely for herself, something she loved. "I'll think about it," she said. Softly, "That's all I ask," the host replied with a smile. The day went on as usual, but the thought stayed in her mind. Every time she walked past the piano, she felt drawn to it again. At one point, when the room was empty, she sat down for a few minutes and played a few quiet notes. It wasn't much, but even those simple sounds made her heart feel alive again. But not everyone forgot what had happened so easily. The arrogant guest from the night before hadn't stopped thinking about it either. He sat at his office desk the next morning, unable to focus. The image of her sitting at that piano kept replaying in his mind. Her calm face, her gentle movements, the way the room went silent. He had gone there to show off, to prove he belonged among the rich and powerful. Instead, he had been humbled by a waitress. He sighed, rubbing his temples. The shame he felt wasn't from others judging him. It came from within. He knew what he had done was wrong. After hours of debating with himself, he made a decision. That evening, he returned to the mansion, hoping to find her there. He wasn't even sure what he wanted to say, only that he needed to say something. When he arrived, the staff was preparing for another small gathering. She was there, arranging glasses at one of the tables. She looked up and froze for a moment when she saw him walking toward her. He took a deep breath and spoke quietly so only she could hear. "I know I already said sorry last night, but I wanted to say it properly." She put down the tray slowly, unsure how to respond. "I was out of line," he continued. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I don't know what I was trying to prove, but it wasn't fair to you." She studied him for a moment. His tone was different now. No arrogance, no pride, just honesty. "It's all right," she said gently. "I've dealt with worse." He shook his head. "It's not all right. I embarrassed you in front of everyone. And you handled it better than I ever could have." There was a long silence. Then he said something unexpected. "You're really talented. Have you ever thought of doing it professionally?" She smiled faintly. "I used to dream of that, but dreams don't always pay the rent." He nodded, looking down. "I get that. But still, you should play again. The world needs to hear it." His sincerity surprised her. For a moment, she didn't see him as the rude man who mocked her. She saw someone trying in his own awkward way to make things right. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once more, then walked away quietly. He didn't expect forgiveness, but her calm acceptance made him feel lighter. Later that evening, after the event ended and the guests had gone, the host approached her again. "About that offer," he said. "They want to book you for a small charity dinner next month. I told them I'd ask, but they're very keen. They even said they'll pay you properly as a performer." Her eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Completely," he replied with a smile. "You don't have to answer now, but think about it." That night, as she walked home under the quiet city lights, her mind swirled with emotions. Fear, excitement, disbelief. She couldn't help but wonder what her mother would have said if she were still alive. Maybe she'd smile and say, "See, the music never left you." When she reached her apartment, she sat down at her old keyboard again. Her fingers moved more confidently this time. She played the same melody she'd played at the mansion, slow, heartfelt, full of memory. As she played, she thought about how strange life could be, how one cruel moment could turn into something beautiful. The following week, the host asked her again about the charity event. This time, she said yes. She spent her evenings practicing after work, rediscovering pieces she used to love. The music filled her tiny apartment, echoing through the thin walls. Her neighbors started pausing outside her door to listen. A little girl from the building across the hall even began waiting by the staircase just to hear her play. It made her smile. Every night before bed, she reminded herself that this all began because someone had tried to humiliate her, and instead, she had found her courage again. Meanwhile, the arrogant guest, whose life had always revolved around status and appearance, found himself thinking differently after that night. He began treating people with more respect, the staff at his office, waiters at restaurants, even strangers on the street. Something about that night had changed him too. He didn't tell anyone why. It was just something he carried quietly. A reminder that kindness and humility matter more than money or pride. Weeks passed quickly. The night of the charity event arrived. She stood backstage, her hands slightly trembling. She wasn't wearing her usual uniform this time. Instead, she wore a simple dress the host had helped her pick out. She looked at the piano waiting for her under the soft lights and took a deep breath. This time she wasn't playing to prove anything. She was playing because she loved it. When she stepped out and began to play, the same warmth spread through the room, that same gentle magic that had filled the mansion weeks before. People listened in silence, completely drawn in. And among the audience sat the man who once mocked her, now clapping quietly with a look of genuine admiration. When the last note faded, the applause came again. But this time, it was more than just appreciation. It was respect. And deep inside, she knew her life had changed. The waitress who once blended into the background had found her voice. Not through words, but through music that spoke straight from the heart. The applause faded slowly, but its warmth stayed in her heart long after the music stopped. As she stood from the piano that night, she could feel her hands still trembling, not from fear this time, but from emotion. The air in the room was heavy with silence for a moment before it filled again with quiet murmurs of admiration. People clapped, some even standing. The lights reflected softly against her face, and for a second, she almost didn't believe what was happening. She gave a shy smile and bowed gently. The host beamed with pride as he stepped forward, thanking her in front of everyone. That, he said warmly, was the sound of something real. She could feel her eyes sting with tears. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. For so long she had been invisible, a face in the crowd, someone who worked quietly and went home tired. But tonight, she had shared a part of herself that had been hidden for years. When the event ended, several guests came up to her, thanking her for the performance. Some asked where she had studied music. Others wanted to know if she taught lessons. She answered each question politely, still a little overwhelmed. The host approached again, handing her a small envelope. "This is for you," he said kindly. "You've earned it." She hesitated. "Sir, I don't know if I can accept that." "You can," he interrupted gently. "This isn't a tip. It's payment for your performance. You played from your heart, and that deserves respect." She finally took it, her voice soft. "Thank you, I really appreciate this." As the guests slowly left, the hall grew quiet again. She stayed behind for a moment, staring at the piano. It seemed to shine differently now, not just as an instrument, but as a symbol of everything that had changed in her life. The host joined her. "You know," he said, "I've hosted many events here, but I've never seen people so touched by a single song." She smiled. "I didn't expect anyone to listen that way." "They didn't just listen," he said. "They felt it. You reminded everyone of something we forget too easily, that music isn't about showing off. It's about connection." She nodded slowly. His words stayed with her. Later that night, as she walked home under the quiet city lights, she held the envelope tightly in her hand. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what it represented: acknowledgement, respect, and rediscovered purpose. The streets were empty, the soft glow of street lamps guiding her way. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small. She reached her apartment, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat by her old keyboard. She placed the envelope on the table beside her and began to play softly. The melody was simple, but her heart was full. The music flowed like a gentle river, and she smiled, thinking of how far she had come in such a short time. As she played, she thought about the man who had once mocked her, the arrogant guest from that night at the mansion. She hadn't seen him since he came to apologize. She wondered if he had been at the charity event. Part of her hoped he had been, though she didn't look for him among the crowd. Far across town, he had indeed been there. He hadn't told anyone he was going. He sat quietly near the back of the room, watching her perform. When the music began, he felt a lump rise in his throat. He wasn't sure why. Maybe guilt, maybe admiration, maybe both. He had come expecting to feel proud of her, but instead, he felt humbled again. After the event, he didn't go up to her. He didn't want to intrude or make her uncomfortable. He simply left quietly, promising himself that he would find a way to make things right, not with words, but with actions. Over the next few weeks, her life began to change little by little. The host introduced her to people in the music community, small restaurant owners, local event organizers, even a piano teacher who needed an assistant. Suddenly, opportunities began appearing where none had existed before. She didn't become famous overnight, but she started playing regularly, at charity dinners, quiet cafes, and local gatherings. Each time she sat down to play, she carried that same humility with her. She didn't see herself as a performer. She just wanted to share what she loved. And people felt that. They came not just to hear her music, but to feel the calmness and honesty that came with it. Some even said her music had helped them through hard times. At first, she didn't know how to respond to such words. But as time went on, she began to realize that music could do more than entertain. It could heal. One afternoon, after playing at a small cafe, she stepped outside to catch her breath. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the evening air. When she opened them, she saw the same man standing across the street, the arrogant guest who had once mocked her. He hesitated for a moment before walking toward her. His clothes were simpler than before, his expression calm. "Hello," he said quietly. She gave a small nod. "Hi, I came to hear you play," he said. "You were incredible again." "Thank you," she replied. "I didn't expect to see you here." He smiled faintly. "I didn't expect to come. But I guess I needed to." There was a pause, a comfortable silence this time. He looked at her sincerely. "You changed something in me that night. I used to walk into rooms thinking I was better than everyone else. But you showed me how wrong I was. I just wanted you to know that." She listened quietly, not sure what to say. "I started volunteering," he continued, "at a youth center downtown. They have an old piano there, and the kids love it. I can't play, but I've been helping them fix the room up. I think I finally understand what you showed me, that kindness is worth more than pride." Her heart softened. She could see the truth in his words. "I'm glad," she said gently. "It's never too late to change." He nodded, smiling. "You know, if you ever want to play for those kids, they'd love it. They could use someone like you, someone who believes in them." She thought about it for a moment, then said, "Maybe I will." They spoke a little longer, not about the past, but about simple things, music, life, and how unexpected moments can change everything. When they parted ways, it wasn't awkward. There was peace between them now, a quiet understanding. That evening, she walked home again under the same city lights that had once guided her through loneliness. But this time she felt something different, hope. Over the next few weeks, she began visiting the youth center. The children there were shy at first, but once they heard her play, their eyes lit up. Some of them wanted to learn, their small fingers pressing clumsily on the keys. She helped them patiently, smiling as they laughed and tried again and again. The sound of laughter mixed with music filled that little room, and it reminded her of her own childhood, of her mother's voice, of evenings spent beside a piano that felt like home. One day, the arrogant man stopped by to drop off supplies. He stood quietly at the door watching her teach. The children surrounded her, their faces glowing with excitement. She glanced up and saw him, and he smiled. There were no words needed. The change in both of them was already clear. When she left that day, she felt lighter. Life had come full circle in a way she hadn't expected. What began as a night of humiliation had turned into something beautiful, not only for her but for others too. That night, back in her small apartment, she played again, this time not for herself, not for applause, but for every person she had met along the way. The notes flowed like a story of pain, forgiveness, discovery, and peace. And as the final note faded into silence, she realized something. The world could be unkind, unfair, even cruel at times. But sometimes all it took was one song, one moment of truth to remind people of what really mattered. She had found her place again, not through fame or wealth, but through something far more powerful: heart. And this time, she knew she would never let the music fade again. Weeks turned into months, and her days began to bloom with new meaning. Every morning felt different now. There was a sense of calmness in her heart that she had never known before. She would wake up early, make a cup of tea, and sit by the window, letting the soft sunlight touch her face before walking to the youth center. The children were always waiting for her with wide smiles and curious eyes. The small piano room had become their favorite place. Sometimes she found them sitting there before she even arrived, trying to play the simple tunes she had taught them. The clumsy notes filled the air, but to her it was the sweetest music. She had begun writing small melodies for them, songs filled with hope and joy. She would clap her hands, sing along, and encourage them to keep going even when they got the notes wrong. Their laughter filled the space where once there had only been silence. It was healing not just for them, but for her too. She often thought about how strange life was. The same piano that had once been a symbol of her pain had become a bridge between hearts. She had played it in loneliness before, but now it was surrounded by love and light. One evening, as she was packing up, the man who had once mocked her came by again. He carried a box of new music books for the kids. His expression was easy and kind, very different from the proud man she had met that first night. He looked around at the colorful posters the children had drawn and smiled.
"They've made this place alive," he said. She nodded.
"They have. I think they saved this place as much as it saved them." He looked at her for a moment, his tone soft. "And you. You've saved a part of me too." She smiled gently, unsure how to reply, so she just said, "Maybe we all helped each other." They talked for a while, about life, music, and how unpredictable it could be. Before leaving, he handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I wanted to do for a long time," he said. "Open it when you get home." That night, sitting at her little table, she opened it slowly. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was neat, careful. It said, "You once told me that music is about connection. I never understood it then, but now I do. I wanted to thank you for opening my eyes. I've been working with a few friends to organize a small concert, not for profit, but to raise funds for the youth center. We want you to play the closing piece. It wouldn't be right without you." She stared at the words for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the letter back into the envelope. She didn't know what to say or how to feel. It wasn't about the concert itself. It was about what it meant. It was proof that change was real, that even the most broken connections could heal if hearts were willing. When the night of the concert arrived, the hall was beautifully decorated, but not in an extravagant way. It was warm and welcoming, filled with families, neighbors, and children from the center. The same man who had once laughed at her now stood near the entrance, helping guests find their seats, smiling humbly at everyone. As she stood backstage, her hands felt cold again, just like they had on that first night months ago. But this time the nervousness wasn't from fear. It was from emotion. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and remembered all the faces she had met along this journey. The children performed first, playing simple songs she had taught them. The audience cheered for them as if they were stars. Their joy was contagious. When it was finally her turn, she walked to the piano slowly, the soft lights casting a golden glow across the stage. The hall grew quiet. She placed her hands on the keys and let her fingers find the melody. The song she played was new, a piece she had written especially for that night. It began gently, almost like a whisper, then grew into something deep and full, like a voice telling a story of pain turned into peace. As the notes rose and fell, people began to lean forward, listening closely. Some closed their eyes, some smiled, and some wiped away tears. Among the crowd, the man sat silently, his eyes glistening. He knew what the song meant. It wasn't just music. It was forgiveness, hope, and gratitude woven together. When the final note faded, there was a pause, that sacred silence that comes before applause. Then the room erupted with clapping and cheers. People stood up, clapping until their hands hurt. She bowed her head, smiling shyly, overwhelmed once again by the warmth of strangers who had become part of her story. After the concert, people gathered around her, thanking her, congratulating her, and asking about her music. But through the crowd, she saw the man waiting quietly at the side, just smiling. She walked toward him. "You did it," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, we all did." He laughed a little, looking down. "You know, that night at the mansion feels like another lifetime now." "It does," she said. "I'm glad it happened, though. Maybe everything had to happen that way." He nodded slowly. "I think you're right." They both looked toward the children, laughing and running around the stage, still excited from their performance. It was a beautiful sight. Innocent, pure, full of hope. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, she stayed behind to help tidy up. The hall was quiet again, the chairs empty, the stage still glowing softly under the dim lights. She walked to the piano, ran her fingers across the keys, and smiled. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was the center of everything that had changed her life, a witness to pain, redemption, and joy. She pressed one key softly, the note echoing gently through the empty room. It felt like a goodbye, but also a beginning. As she stepped outside, the cool air brushed her face. The city was quiet, the stars faintly visible above the streetlights. She looked up and whispered to herself, "Thank you," though she wasn't sure who she was thanking, life, fate, or the music itself. From that night on, things continued to grow in quiet, beautiful ways. The youth center expanded. More children joined the music program. Donations came in, and a small team of volunteers formed to keep it running. She spent most of her days there teaching, guiding, and sometimes just listening. The man often stopped by too, helping wherever he could. They became good friends. Two people whose paths had crossed in the most unexpected way, forever changed by it. Sometimes, when the children played together, she would sit back and think about how easily she could have given up that night, when she was laughed at, how close she had come to walking away from the piano forever. But she hadn't.